Hey there, painters. I wanted to share with you my progress on my example painting. So I'm going to share my screen. I recorded myself going on top of my underpainting. So I'm going to share that with you and sort of just narrate my thought process throughout it. So let's see here. So I've got my primary colors, and I'm going to start thinking about my background at this point. And so you might recall from my reference image what colors I'm working with. They're pretty bright, some like magenta and oranges, so that's what I'm working on right now. Of course, my still life is off to the left here, so I'm constantly turning my head to the left to look at the actual objects to help me get close to the colors, more concerned with the value of the color than getting the color perfectly right. I'm mostly just trying to create a mid-tone magenta-like color at this point. I'm going to speed it up a little bit. Continuing to work in the background. And right there, you just saw me cover up some of my underpainting of a different value. So all along the way, I'm reassessing the underpainting that I first did and making changes to the shapes and arrangements of things as I go, because as I'm working, I'm recognizing things that I didn't see before. So I'm again working with an orange. It's the same combo of colors. It's the red and the yellow together, but I have more yellow this time. And again, making some changes to my initial underpainting layout. Because the more I look at my objects, the more I can see. I'm paying attention not just to colors, but to values, hugely so about values, and the cast shadows that are created by these various three-dimensional objects down onto my surface. So if it's not obvious at this point, I've basically got like stacked pieces of colored paper as my background. So that's the parts that I'm working on right now. And I'm adding a little bit of blue to create a cast shadow from the orange onto the green paper. So I'm not using black at all at this point, notice. I used blue to darken the value of the green. And that was enough to create a value contrast. I think at this point I go and get fresh water. Yeah, that's what I'm up to. Let's slow it down a little bit. We don't have to go 10 times fast. We'll go 5 times fast so you can kind of see a little bit more. So now I start to work on this orange shape. And I'm using a lot of yellow this time because I want it to be pretty bright. And I'm also kind of paying attention to the fact that when I get close to the edge, I'm trying to make my shape a little sharper than I was concerned about before. So I'm using a little bit extra water on my brush so that the edge can be cleaner looking than if I had a drier brush. And I'm noticing that there is, on this three-dimensional orange, some shadows along the side. So I pick up a little bit of purple and start to blend that into the orange while it's still wet. Do the same with a little bit of red. And then I'm going to come in with some highlights and just sort of dot them to create a bit of a texture of the orange rind. And the same with a few little shadowed dots. And I recognize too that there's a little bit of green being reflected from the green paper. And it's soon that I realize, oh my gosh, this orange is actually bigger than I painted it before. So I go back in and I extend the size of the orange, and it makes a lot more sense with kind of how it's next to the cast shadow now. It doesn't look so much like it's floating above the papers, but rather grounded down onto those colored papers. Now I start to move to the blue crane, the paper crane that is one of the focal points of the project. And I know that I have an overlapping shape of the other crane on top, but I just go right on top of it for now, because later I'm gonna go on top of the blue. Sometimes I like to mix just directly on the canvas. So you saw me there a moment ago pick up a little bit of white and just put it right on top of the canvas, on top of some wet blue paint I already had, and just mix it right there, instead of mixing it separately on the palette and then bringing it to the canvas. You'll see me throughout this do kind of a little bit of both. So the paper crane, of course, is really geometric. So I'm trying to keep my edges relatively sharp. I'm gonna pause there just to show you how I attempt to stabilize my hand a little bit. Let's see if I can get that back. So this is real time now. So it's like the actual pace of my strokes. Just double it up. Okay, so I pick up a small brush because I have a little bit of a highlight that I want to use along the side, and I'm also recognizing I can just add a little bit of that blue. Okay, here's what I wanted to show you. I'm adding a little bit of blue to darken this area, but see how I'm putting my pinky right here? I'm not resting my entire side of my hand down because I don't want to smush what I've done, but my pinky just rests on the canvas, and that helps me really stabilize my hand so that I can be steady as I'm doing something that's a little more precise than some of the areas I had been doing. So the only part of my hand that's touching the canvas is my pinky at that point, the pinky and the brush. Here's where I come back in with that little highlight that's in just the crease of the fold of the paper. And then I go right up alongside it and work to create a mid-tone blue for the next triangle. And here's another instance where I sort of move a little bit away from the shapes of the underpainting and adjust to what I see now and make that triangle a bit bigger and shift the angle just slightly to make it more accurate to what I actually see. And I'm gonna do the same sort of adjustment with the next triangle over here, which you'll see in a second. Go back to accentuate that highlight again. Put a little bit along the outer edge, not like a continuous line, but in some spots where I see that would be useful. Yep, and so here again, just shifting my shape away from what the underpainting originally implied, because I can just recognize the angles a little bit better now than I did at first. So what that means, of course, is I'm gonna have to take this little sliver of the underpainting that's showing through and make this coral color again. So I do that in a moment. Adding a little bit of blue to create some value, especially along that right side, and then even just a little bit of yellow and blend it in to create sort of a reflection of green. That's a reaction of this like yellow reflecting onto the blue. So there's like an optical mixing going there that I recognize that I want to portray. So here I'm with the coral color again, just covering up some of that underpainting and just doing my best to match the color that I made at the very beginning of the painting session. I feel pretty good about that. Using a smaller brush kind of around the edges now that I've gotten sort of the big areas in there. Would you mind coming back in just a minute? Oh, yeah, that's fine. Thanks. Are you done with today? Yeah. Hold on. I'm just trying to record a video. It's okay. Okay, so now I'm working in the shadows. And it's at this point that I decide to pause, let things dry, and then go back on top in another session. I hope that was helpful.